Dominic Castellano had been the head of the Castellano family for exactly 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days. In that time, he had survived 14 attempts on his life, 3 hostile corporate takeovers, and 1 truly catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner where his Aunt Gianna had brought her new boyfriend who turned out to be a federal informant. So when the new bartender showed up at his nightclub La Dolce Vita, with the posture of a military recruit, the haircut of someone who had recently left a very structured organization, and the inability to make a single cocktail correctly, Dominic knew exactly what he was dealing with. He just didn't expect him to be so ridiculously pretty. "Sir," said Marco, his right-hand man and the only person on earth allowed to interrupt his espresso time. "The new bartender is here. The one the agency planted." Dominic didn't look up from his newspaper. Description: 5'10", athletic build, dark hair, gray eyes, Omega. Smells like. Marco paused, and Dominic finally glanced up. His enforcer, a man who had once stared down a rival family boss without blinking, looked genuinely confused. "He smells like a rainstorm, sir. Like a really nice one. The kind where you want to sit on the porch and just..." "Marco, right? Sorry. He's downstairs." He told the hiring manager his name is Jake Smith. Marco used air quotes so aggressive they could have been classified as a weapon. "Jake Smith." Dominic folded his newspaper with the precision of a man who appreciated order in all things. "That is, without question, the most generic false name I have ever heard. And I once met a man who introduced himself as John Doe with a straight face. Want me to handle it?" Dominic considered this. The smart move, the move his father would have made, the move any reasonable crime boss would make, was to send the little soldier away. Preferably with a message attached. Something elegant. Something that said, "I know what you are, and you should tell your superiors they'll need to try harder." Instead, Dominic said, "No. Let him stay." Marco blinked. "Sir, I want to see how this plays out. Besides..." Dominic straightened his cufflinks, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "It's been boring around here lately." Marco, who had been with the Castellano family since he was 19 and had long ago stopped being surprised by his boss's eccentricities, simply nodded. "I'll inform the staff to keep an eye on him." "A gentle eye, Marco. We don't want to scare him off before the fun begins." The fun began approximately 45 minutes later, when Dominic descended to the main floor of La Dolce Vita and found his new bartender staring at a cocktail shaker like it had personally offended his ancestors. The club was closed for another 2 hours, but the staff was prepping. Dominic leaned against the VIP balcony railing and watched. The Omega, Jake Smith, heaven help them all, was holding a bottle of vodka in one hand and a bottle of grenadine in the other. He looked between them with the expression of a man trying to defuse a bomb. Then, with the confidence of someone who had clearly never made a drink in his life, he poured approximately 6 shots of vodka into a glass and topped it with what appeared to be half a bottle of grenadine. The resulting liquid was the color of a crime scene. "That," said Enzo, the actual bartender who was training him, "is not a cosmopolitan." Jake looked down at his creation. "It's close. It looks like you liquefied a flamingo. Is that bad?" Enzo turned and walked away, muttering prayers in Italian. Dominic pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from laughing out loud. This was the operative they had sent to bring down the Castellano Empire? This man who could not distinguish grenadine from cranberry juice. He was absolutely delightful. Dominic watched for another 20 minutes as Jake attempted to learn the basics of bartending with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever and the skill of a golden retriever who had been asked to do calculus. He broke 2 glasses, overpoured every single drink, and at one point accidentally sprayed himself in the face with the soda gun. When he looked up, soaking wet and blinking soda water out of those remarkable gray eyes, his gaze locked directly onto Dominic's. Time did something strange. It didn't stop exactly. Dominic wasn't the kind of man who dealt in cliches, but it stuttered, like a record skipping, like the universe had hiccuped. The Omega's eyes widened. His lips parted. A drop of soda water ran down the side of his jaw, tracing the line of his throat, and Dominic's brain, normally a finely tuned instrument of strategy and calculation, produced exactly one thought. Oh no, he's gorgeous. This was, Dominic reflected, incredibly inconvenient. Kael Reyes, not Jake Smith, never Jake Smith, who had even come up with that name, had a problem. Several problems, actually, but they could be organized into a neat list because Kael was the kind of person who organized his problems into neat lists. It was a coping mechanism his therapist had suggested, back when he'd still had a therapist, before his commanding officer had decided that therapy was an unnecessary luxury for an Omega who should be focused on the mission. Problem number 1. He could not, for the life of him, make a cocktail. This was a significant issue, given that his cover required him to be a bartender. Kael had trained in hand-to-hand combat, infiltration, surveillance, tactical analysis, and 17 different ways to incapacitate a man with a paperclip. Nobody had thought to teach him how to make a mojito. Problem number 2. Dominic Castellano had looked at him. Kael had memorized the target's file. He knew Dominic's height, 6'2", his age, 31, his blood type, O-negative, his shoe size, 12, and his favorite restaurant, a tiny trattoria in the East Village that served handmade pasta and didn't take reservations. He knew Dominic had taken over the family at 24 after his father's retirement, that he had restructured the organization's less-than-legal enterprises with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO, and that he was, according to multiple intelligence reports, extremely dangerous. What the file had not mentioned, what no intelligence report had seen fit to include, was that Dominic Castellano had brown eyes the color of expensive whiskey and a jawline that could have been designed by an architect with a grudge against Omegas everywhere. That felt like relevant information. Someone should have included that. Problem number 3. He had just sprayed himself in the face with a soda gun in front of the most attractive man he had ever seen. Kael stood behind the bar, dripping wet, staring up at the VIP balcony where Dominic Castellano leaned against the railing in a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Kael's annual salary, and thought, "I would like the earth to open up and swallow me whole, please and thank you." Dominic smiled. It was not a threatening smile. It was not the smile of a man who knew he was being targeted. It was warm and amused and crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Kael felt something in his chest do a complicated gymnastics routine. Focus, he told himself. You are a trained operative. You have a mission. You are here to gather intelligence and ultimately neutralize the target. You are not here to develop feelings about the target's smile. His inner Omega, which Kael had spent his entire military career suppressing with the dedication of a man plugging holes in a dam, whispered, "But have you considered that the smile is really, really nice?" Kael had not considered that. Kael refused to consider that. Kael picked up a bar towel, dried his face, and resolved to focus on the mission. The mission lasted approximately 3 more hours before encountering its next setback, which came in the form of Dominic Castellano appearing at the bar just before opening and saying, in a voice like dark velvet over gravel, "You must be the new bartender." "Yes," Kael said, standing at attention before he could stop himself. He forced his shoulders to relax. Normal bartenders did not stand at attention. Normal bartenders slouched. He attempted a slouch. It looked like he was having a medical event. "I'm Jake Smith," Dominic said, and something in his tone suggested he found this deeply entertaining. "Welcome to La Dolce Vita, Jake. I'm Dominic." "I know who you are," Kael said, and then immediately wanted to take a tactical retreat into the walk-in freezer. "I mean, you're the owner. Obviously, everyone knows that, because it's public information." "Stop talking," his brain screamed. "For the love of all that is holy, stop talking." "I did some research," Kael continued, because apparently his mouth had seceded from the union of his body. "Before I applied for the job, because that's what you do. When you apply for jobs, you research the company." Dominic's smile widened. He sat down at the bar with the fluid grace of a man who owned every room he entered. "I appreciate thoroughness. Tell me, Jake." The way he said the name was almost playful, like he was in on a joke Kael hadn't realized he was telling. "Where did you bartend before?" Kael had prepared for this question. He had memorized a backstory. He had rehearsed it. He opened his mouth and what came out was, "A bar." Silence. "A bar," Dominic repeated. Yes, it was a bar. In a city. Kael's fake backstory had evaporated from his brain like morning dew on asphalt. All that remained was the vague awareness that Dominic smelled like sandalwood and cedar and something warm and spicy that made Kael's omega instincts sit up and beg. It was called the drink place. The drink place. You absolute disaster of a human being. The drink place, Dominic said slowly. I don't think I've heard of it. It closed down, Kael said quickly. Very suddenly. Overnight. No records. Tragic, really? Tragic? Dominic agreed. And he was definitely laughing behind those whiskey-brown eyes. Well, Jake from the drink place, I'm sure you'll fit right in here. Could I trouble you for an old-fashioned? Kael knew what an old-fashioned was. In theory, he had read about it on the bus ride over. It had bourbon in it, probably, and some other things. A cherry? Was there a cherry? Coming right up, he said, with the false confidence of a man walking to his own doom. What he produced for minutes later was a glass containing bourbon, an entire muddled orange, including the peel, what appeared to be a maraschino cherry that had been crushed rather than placed, and a splash of something that might have been bitters or might have been Worcestershire sauce. The liquid was cloudy and had bits floating in it. Kael set it in front of Dominic with hands that absolutely did not tremble. Dominic looked at the drink. He looked at Kael. He looked at the drink again. Then he picked it up and took a sip. He did not wince. He did not spit it out. He swallowed, set the glass down and said with perfect composure, "Interesting interpretation. Thank you," Kael whispered. "I'd like you to work the VIP section tonight," Dominic said, standing. He straightened his suit jacket. "Personally, the VIP. But I just started. I like to keep new talent close." Dominic's gaze held his, steady and warm and absolutely knowing. "Where I can keep an eye on them." He walked away, and Kael gripped the edge of the bar until his knuckles went white and thought, I am in so much trouble. Over the next 2 weeks, Kael gathered the following intelligence. 1. Dominic Castellano ate lunch at his desk every day at 12:30. It was always something homemade, packed in a glass container because he didn't believe in plastic. 2. He called his mother every Sunday without fail and always ended the conversation with, "Yes, Mama, I'm eating enough. Yes, Mama, I'm wearing a coat." 3. He knew the name of every single employee in his organization, from his top lieutenants to the woman who cleaned the club bathrooms at 4 a.m., whose name was Rosa and whose grandson had just gotten into college, which Dominic was apparently paying for. 4. He had a cat named Caravaggio who was, based on the photos Dominic had shown Kael unprompted, the ugliest animal in the 5 boroughs. Caravaggio had 1 eye, half a tail, and an underbite that made him look permanently offended. Dominic spoke about this cat with the tenderness other men reserved for their firstborn children. 5. He was, against all logic and reason and everything Kael had been briefed on, genuinely kind. This was a problem. It was a problem because Kael's mission briefing had described Dominic Castellano as ruthless, calculating, and a high-priority target who represents a significant threat. It had not described him as the kind of man who notices when his bartender looks tired and sends him home early with a container of leftover pasta from his own lunch. It had not described him as the kind of man who, upon learning that Jake was living in a cramped studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, had frowned with genuine concern and said, "That area isn't safe at night. I'll have Marco drive you home." Marco had driven Kael home in a black SUV, in total silence, for 25 minutes. When Kael had gotten out and said, "Thank you," Marco had replied, "He likes you," in a tone that suggested this was both an observation and a threat. Then he had driven away. It was also a problem because Kael was failing spectacularly at every other aspect of his mission. He had been tasked with planting surveillance devices in Dominic's office. His first attempt had ended when he'd gotten lost in the club's back hallways and accidentally walked into a storage closet, where he'd been trapped for 45 minutes until a busboy heard him knocking. His second attempt had been thwarted by the fact that Dominic was always in his office. The man worked constantly. Kael had tried to wait him out once, lurking in the hallway at 2 a.m., only to hear Dominic's voice through the door saying, "Jake, if you're going to hover, you might as well come in and have a coffee." Kael had been so startled he'd knocked over a potted plant. He'd gone in for coffee. It had been excellent coffee. They talked for 2 hours about, of all things, classic literature. Dominic had a particular passion for Gabriel Garcia Marquez and had quoted passages from Love in the Time of Cholera from memory, his deep voice turning the Spanish phrases into something that made Kael's pulse do unreasonable things. At 4 a.m., Dominic had looked at him across the desk with those warm brown eyes and said, "You're not what I expected, Jake Smith." And Kael had thought, with dawning horror, "Neither are you." "He's getting suspicious," Kael reported during his weekly check-in, which took place via encrypted phone in the bathroom of a gas station 14 blocks from the club, because he was a professional. "Thank you very much." "Has he confronted you?" asked Commander Harris, his handler, whose voice always sounded like he was chewing on something unpleasant. "No, but he keeps looking at me. Looking at you." "Yes, with his eyes." A long pause. "Reyes, are you telling me the target is looking at you with his eyes? As opposed to what? His elbows." "It's the way he looks at me, sir. It's—" Kael struggled for the right word. "Intense? Knowing? Like he could see straight through Kael's terrible cover story and mediocre bartending skills to the person underneath, and liked what he saw? Disconcerting. You're a trained operative. You can handle disconcerting. Can I, though?" Kael thought, remembering the way Dominic's hand had brushed his when passing him the coffee mug, and how that single point of contact had sent electricity cascading up his arm and directly into the part of his brain responsible for poor decisions. "Yes, sir," he said. "Absolutely. Good. We need those surveillance devices planted. The operation depends on it." "Understood, sir." Kael hung up, stared at himself in the gas station bathroom mirror, and said, out loud, to his own reflection, "You are not developing feelings for the target. You are not developing feelings for the target." His reflection looked unconvinced. It happened at the Castellano family's annual charity gala. Dominic hosted it every year, a black tie affair at a hotel ballroom that raised money for youth arts programs throughout the city. It was, by all accounts, a genuinely philanthropic event, which did not fit the narrative Kael had been given about his target, and which he was choosing not to examine too closely. Kael had been assigned to work the event as a server, because Enzo had flatly refused to let him behind a bar ever again after the Negroni incident, which had resulted in a drink that was somehow both on fire and frozen and which Enzo still referred to as an affront to Italy. So Kael was circulating with a tray of crab cakes. He was doing fine. The tray was balanced. The crab cakes were staying on the tray. He had successfully offered crab cakes to 11 people without dropping, spilling, or otherwise catastrophizing anything. He was, dare he say it, competent. And then Dominic walked in. Dominic in his everyday suits was already a problem. Dominic in a tuxedo was a crisis. The jacket was perfectly tailored, emphasizing shoulders that Kael's omega hindbrain immediately categorized as capable of providing excellent protection from predators and also very nice to look at. His dark hair was styled back from his face, revealing the full devastating impact of his bone structure. He was wearing a watch that caught the light when he moved, and he moved like water. Fluid, unhurried, inevitable. He was talking to someone. A woman in a red dress, laughing at something she said, and when he laughed, his whole face changed. It went from intimidating to incandescent. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to spend your entire life figuring out how to cause it again. Kael walked directly into a pillar. The tray of crab cakes launched into the air with the graceful trajectory of a clay pigeon, and came down in a shower of breadcrumbs and crustacean on the head of a man who turned out to be a very important city councilman. Time stopped, actually stopped this time, none of that stuttering business. The councilman stood frozen, a crab cake balanced perfectly on top of his bald head like a tiny, breaded hat. Fragments of crab and remoulade sauce decorated his shoulders like the world's worst epaulets. The ballroom went silent. Kael stood there, holding an empty tray, and contemplated the possibility of spontaneous human combustion. Could he simply will himself to cease existing? Was that an option? He felt like it should be an option. Then Dominic was there. He materialized at Kael's side like he teleported. One hand on the small of Kael's back, warm, steady, grounding, and with his other hand, he plucked the crab cake off the councilman's head with the delicacy of a man removing a crown. "Councilman Rivera," Dominic said, his voice smooth as silk, "I am so sorry. We've been experimenting with a new serving-style aerial presentation. Clearly, it needs work." He snapped his fingers, and 2 staff members appeared instantly with napkins and a fresh drink. "Please allow my team to help. And can I interest you in the lobster? I promise it will arrive by more traditional means." The councilman blinked, looked at Dominic, looked at the crab cake, and then, miraculously, laughed. "Aerial presentation," he repeated, dabbing his head with a napkin. "That's a new one, Castellano." The tension broke. People chuckled. Conversations resumed. Crisis averted. Dominic steered Kael toward a quiet alcove near the service entrance, his hand never leaving Kael's back. When they were out of sight, he turned to face him, and Kael braced for fury. What he got was a grin. A full, unreserved, devastating grin that showed all of Dominic's teeth and crinkled his eyes and dimpled his left cheek. He had a dimple. This was new information. Why did he have a dimple? "That," Dominic said, "was the single greatest thing I have ever witnessed in my life." Kael stared at him. "I assaulted a city councilman with seafood. You gave him a crab cake hat. I've been trying to find a way to liven up these galas for years, and you've done it in one evening. I should be fired." "Absolutely not. You should be promoted. Head of airborne appetizers." A laugh escaped Kael before he could stop it. A real laugh, startled and bright. Nothing like the controlled non-expressions he'd been trained to maintain. Dominic's grin softened into something else. Something warmer. His hand was still on Kael's back, and Kael could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric of his white service shirt. "You're laughing," Dominic said quietly. "You should do that more often. I just destroyed a diplomatic relationship with baked goods. Laughing seems inappropriate. Rivera's fine. He'll dine out on this story for years. But I'm more concerned about you." Dominic's brow furrowed. Actual, genuine concern. For a man he surely knew was there to bring him down. "Are you hurt? You hit that pillar pretty hard." Kael's forehead was, in fact, throbbing. He hadn't noticed until now. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're going to have a bruise." Dominic reached up, and his fingers, gentle, impossibly gentle for a man with his reputation, brushed the spot on Kael's forehead where it had connected with marble. "Come upstairs. I have a first aid kit in the suite." "That's not necessary. Jake." Dominic's voice was soft but left no room for argument. "Come upstairs." Kael went upstairs. The hotel suite was absurdly luxurious. All cream-colored furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Dominic sat Kael on the edge of a sofa, retrieved a first aid kit from the bathroom, and proceeded to clean and apply a small bandage to Kael's forehead with the focused precision of a surgeon. "You know," Dominic said conversationally, his face inches from Kael's as he smoothed the bandage into place, "you are, without question, the worst undercover operative I have ever encountered." Kael's blood went cold. He started to pull back. Instinct, training, the urge to flee. But Dominic's hand cupped the side of his face, holding him still. Not forcefully. He could have broken the hold in a heartbeat. But the touch was so careful, so unexpectedly tender, that it froze him more effectively than any restraint. "I've known since the day you walked in," Dominic continued, his thumb tracing a slow arc across Kael's cheekbone. "Your posture, your haircut, the fact that your cover name is Jake Smith and your fake employment history includes a bar called The Drink Place." Kael closed his eyes. "How long were you going to let me?" "As long as it took." "As long as it took for what?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. When Kael opened his eyes, the Alpha was looking at him with an expression he couldn't decode. Couldn't file into any category his training had prepared him for. It was raw and open and almost vulnerable, and it looked completely wrong on the face of a man who was supposed to be a ruthless crime boss. "I haven't figured that part out yet," Dominic admitted. I just knew I wasn't ready for you to leave. Kael's heart was hammering so hard he was sure Dominic could hear it. You should have had me removed. You should have sent a message to my handlers. That's what any rational person in your position would have done. Probably. Dominic dropped his hand, but slowly, like he was reluctant to break contact. In my defense, I was distracted. By what? By you, obviously. Dominic leaned back, and the vulnerability shuddered behind something wry and self-deprecating. By your terrible cocktails and your worst cover story and the way you stand at attention when you're nervous and the way you looked at me the first day like I was a problem you couldn't solve. You are a problem I can't solve. See? That right there. Dominic pointed at him. You say things like that, and I forget that you're literally here to end my career and possibly my freedom, and all I can think about is how to make you laugh again. The room was very quiet. The sounds of the gala drifted up from below. Music, conversation, the clink of glasses. Kael could smell Dominic's scent, rich and warm and absolutely everywhere, and his Omega instincts were staging a full-scale revolt against his training. My name isn't Jake, he said, came out barely above a whisper. It's Kael. Kael Reyes. Dominic smiled. It was the softest smile Kael had ever seen on another person's face. I know. I looked you up on day 2. Of course you did. Kael. Dominic said his real name like he was tasting it. I like that much better. You're impossible. I've been told. I should go. You should. Dominic didn't move. Neither did Kael. They sat there, on the edge of an absurdly expensive sofa, in a hotel suite overlooking a city that sparkled like scattered diamonds, and didn't move. After the gala, 2 things happened simultaneously. The first was that Kael's handlers grew impatient. Commander Harris's check-in calls went from weekly to daily, his tone increasingly clipped. It's been a month, Reyes. We need results. We need evidence. We need something concrete. I'm working on it, Kael said each time, and each time it was less true than the time before. The second thing was that Dominic stopped pretending. Not about knowing Kael's identity. That cat was out of the bag and had knocked over a vase on its way. No, Dominic stopped pretending that his interest in Kael was casual. He stopped maintaining the polite distance of an employer. He started existing in Kael's space with the easy confidence of a man who had decided what he wanted and was simply waiting for the universe to catch up. He started bringing Kael coffee in the mornings, real coffee, from the Italian espresso machine in his office, hand-delivered. He started finding excuses to be at the bar during Kael's shifts, sitting in the corner with his laptop, doing work but looking up every few minutes to watch Kael struggle with the cocktail shaker. Kael's bartending had improved from biohazard to merely unfortunate. He could now make a passable gin and tonic, provided nobody asked for a lime wedge, because his lime-cutting technique had been described by Enzo as agricultural. Dominic started telling him things. Little things, at first funny stories about growing up in the family, about his younger sister Valentina who was in medical school and texted him 17 times a day, about Caravaggio's ongoing feud with the neighbor's Pomeranian. Then bigger things. About how he'd never wanted to take over the family business. About how he'd been studying art history at Columbia when his father's health had declined, and how he'd left behind a half-finished thesis on Baroque painting to step into a world he'd never chosen. I had a professor, Dominic told him one night, long after the club had closed, when they were sitting on the rooftop terrace with the city humming below them. Dr. Whitfield. She told me I had an extraordinary eye, that I could have been a curator, maybe even a critic. She wrote me a recommendation letter for a graduate program in Florence. What happened to it? It's in a drawer in my desk, underneath the quarterly earnings reports. Dominic's mouth twisted. Not quite a smile, not quite not one. Sometimes I take it out and read it, just to remember that there was a version of me who could have had paint under his fingernails instead of... He stopped, shook his head. Instead of all this. Kael looked at him. This man who ran an empire he'd never asked for, who paid for strangers' education and rescued one-eyed cats and made terrible jokes about crab cakes, and felt something crack open in his chest. Something he'd kept locked down and sealed away through years of training and missions and being told that Omegas in the military had to be twice as hard, twice as cold, twice as detached. You could still go, Kael said. To Florence. Dominic looked at him sideways. You trying to get rid of me, Kael Reyes? I'm trying to save you, Kael thought, and the thought terrified him. I don't know what I'm trying to do anymore. That makes two of us. They sat in silence after that, close enough that their shoulders touched, and watched the city lights blur through a haze of complicated feelings that neither of them was equipped to name. It was Marco who brought it to a head. Boss, he said one Tuesday morning, standing in the doorway of Dominic's office with an expression that meant trouble. We need to talk about the Omega. Dominic set down his espresso. His name is Kael. His name is Specialist Kael Reyes, formerly of the 7th Special Operations Unit, currently on detached assignment to a task force whose sole purpose is dismantling our organization. Marco stepped inside and closed the door. And he reported to his handlers last night. Dominic's expression didn't change. He reports to them every night. This time they gave him a deadline. 2 weeks to deliver actionable intelligence, or they're pulling him out and sending someone else. Marco paused. Someone who won't be as gentle. The word hung in the air like smoke. Dominic was quiet for a long time. He turned his chair toward the window, looking out at the cityscape he'd inherited along with everything else. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. What do you recommend? What I've recommended from the beginning. Remove the threat. Not him. Marco added quickly, because he had eyes and had watched his boss fall in slow motion for 6 weeks. But we need to feed his handlers something. Enough to buy time. Enough to keep them from sending someone who might actually be competent. You want me to give him fake intelligence. I want you to give him breadcrumbs. Just enough to keep his people satisfied. Just enough to keep him here. Dominic turned back. And then what? Marco, who was not a sentimental man, who had broken fingers and intimidated rivals and once driven a getaway car through a shopping mall, looked at his boss, his friend, the man he'd sworn loyalty to at 19, and said, simply, and then you figure out what you want, Dominic, because I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at that Omega. And if you let them take him away from you, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. It was the longest speech Marco had ever made. He looked vaguely horrified by it. That was very emotional, Marco. I'd like to never speak of it again. Noted. Dominic found Kael in the club's kitchen at midnight, sitting on a steel prep counter with his legs dangling, eating leftover risotto straight from the container. He looked young and tired and nothing like a trained operative. He looked like exactly what he was. A 26-year-old Omega who had been handed an impossible mission and was slowly drowning in it. Hey, Kael said, caught mid-bite. A grain of rice was stuck to his lower lip. It was unreasonably endearing. I know about the deadline, Dominic said. Kael's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. How? I know everything that happens in my city, Kael. I thought we'd established this. The fork lowered. Kael set the container aside, and the tiredness in his face shifted into something harder. Soldier mode. Kael became someone else when he did that. Straighter spine, flatter eyes, every soft edge tucked away behind training and discipline. Dominic found that he hated it. So what happens now? Kael asked. You've known from the beginning. You've let me stumble around your club, making terrible drinks and walking into pillars for 6 weeks. Was it a game? Were you just? If it was a game, it stopped being one approximately 4 weeks ago. Dominic stepped closer. Right around the time you told me about the scar on your shoulder. Kael's hand moved involuntarily toward his left shoulder. The one he'd dislocated on a mission 3 years ago. The one that still ached when it rained. He'd told Dominic about it at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, sleepy and unguarded, and Dominic had listened with an intensity that made Kael feel like the only person in the world. That was, I shouldn't have told you that. Probably not, and I shouldn't have spent the entire next day thinking about it. But here we are. Here we are, Kael echoed, with a deadline and a mission and a situation that has no good ending. Dominic took another step. They were close now, close enough that Kael could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to catalog every expression that crossed his face. Determination, fear, tenderness, want. "I'm going to give you something," Dominic said. "Information. Not real, not anything that could truly compromise my people. But enough to satisfy your handlers. Enough to buy us time." "Us," Kael repeated. "Us. Because whether you've admitted it to yourself yet or not, there is an US. There has been since the night of the gala, maybe since the first day, maybe since you made me the worst old-fashioned in the history of mixology, and I drank it anyway because you were looking at me like you couldn't decide whether to take me down or take me out to dinner." Kael's breath caught. "I can't, Dominic. I'm a soldier. I have orders. And I'm a man who deals in impossible situations. Let me deal in this one." Dominic reached out, slowly, giving Kael every chance to pull away, and took his hand. "Trust me." It was an absurd thing to ask. Trust a man he'd been sent to topple. Trust an alpha mafia boss with a reputation that could fill a filing cabinet. Trust someone he'd known for 6 weeks. Kael looked down at their joined hands. Dominic's fingers were warm around his. "Steady. Sure. You drank that old-fashioned," Kael said. "It had Worcestershire sauce in it." "I know. I could taste it. You didn't even flinch. You were watching. I wasn't going to flinch." Kael looked up. The soldier's mask was cracking. Underneath it, something raw and real and terrified was trying to breathe. "This is the worst idea either of us has ever had," he said. "Undoubtedly. I'm in." Dominic's smile could have powered the entire eastern seaboard. The plan was simple. Dominic would feed Kael carefully curated intelligence. Real enough to pass scrutiny, harmless enough to protect his people. Kael would deliver it to his handlers. They would buy time while they figured out everything else. The plan did not account for the fact that everything else included a rapidly escalating romantic situation that neither of them had the emotional tools to handle. It started with dinners. "You need to eat real food," Dominic declared after discovering that Kael's diet consisted primarily of protein bars and whatever he could steal from the club kitchen. "You are a human being, not a vending machine." He started cooking for Kael at his apartment, which Kael had to be driven to by Marco, who spent the entire drive communicating his opinions on the situation through the medium of aggressive silence. Dominic cooked the way he did everything else, with absolute commitment and zero regard for moderation. A simple dinner involved handmade pasta, a sauce that had been simmering for hours, fresh bread, a salad with ingredients Kael couldn't identify, and a dessert that was so good it made Kael's eyes water. They ate at Dominic's kitchen counter while Caravaggio glared at Kael from atop the refrigerator with his single eye, clearly recognizing a romantic rival. "Your cat doesn't like me," Kael observed. "Caravaggio doesn't like anyone. It's his charm. He hissed at me when I came in. He hisses at the mailman. He hisses at birds. He once hissed at his own reflection. Don't take it personally." As if to prove a point, Caravaggio chose that moment to jump down from the refrigerator, cross the kitchen with the dignity of a very small, very ugly king, and settle himself directly in Kael's lap. Kael froze. Dominic froze. Caravaggio began to purr. "He's never done that before," Dominic said, in the tone of voice a man might use upon witnessing a miracle. "He's never voluntarily sat on anyone. I've had him for 3 years, and he's never once." Caravaggio kneaded his paws on Kael's thigh, turned in a circle, and fell asleep. Kael looked down at the ugly, purring cat in his lap, and looked up at Dominic, and Dominic was looking at him with an expression of such naked, unguarded affection that it stole the breath from Kael's lungs. "He approves of you," Dominic said softly. "Does his approval matter?" "His approval is the only one I care about." They looked at each other across a kitchen counter covered in pasta flour and olive oil, with a one-eyed cat snoring between them, and Kael thought, "I am supposed to be bringing this man down, and instead he is building me up, piece by piece, into someone I didn't know I could be." It was terrifying. It was wonderful. He fed his handlers the fake intelligence. They were satisfied. The deadline extended. And in the space that bought, something grew. It grew in late-night conversations and morning coffees. In the way Dominic started leaving books on the bar for Kael, Novels he thought he'd enjoy, always with a sticky note inside. Thought of you. D. In the way Kael found himself arriving at the club earlier and earlier, not because his cover required it, but because Dominic would be there, and being near Dominic had become the organizing principle of his days. It grew in accidental touches that stopped being accidental. In the way Dominic's hand found the small of Kael's back whenever they walked together. In the way Kael leaned into it instead of pulling away. It grew in the night Dominic took Kael to the Met after hours, because of course he had connections at the Met, because this man contained multitudes, and walked him through galleries of Renaissance paintings, his voice low and reverent as he explained brushstrokes and composition, and the way Caravaggio, the painter, not the cat, though Dominic acknowledged the confusion, used light and shadow to create drama. "You know so much about this?" Kael said, watching Dominic's face more than the paintings. "I was going to make it my life. Before..." The familiar shrug. "Before everything. It's not too late. Are you going to keep saying that? Until you believe it." Dominic turned to him, and in the dim gallery light, surrounded by 500 years of art and beauty and human achievement, he said, "You know what I believe, Kael Reyes? I believe that you walked into my club 6 weeks ago as a stranger with a ridiculous fake name and the worst bartending skills on the eastern seaboard, and somehow, against every law of logic and self-preservation, you became the most important person in my world." Kael's heart was in his throat. His eyes burned. "Dominic, I'm going to kiss you now. If that's something you'd be open to." "We shouldn't. That isn't what I asked." Kael looked at this man. This infuriating, impossible, gentle, generous man who had been patient with every one of Kael's disasters, who had drunk Worcestershire sauce bourbon without flinching, who loved an ugly cat and called his mother on Sundays. "Yes," Kael said, "I'm open to that." Dominic kissed him in front of a painting of two angels, soft and slow and careful. Like Kael was something precious, something worth being gentle with. His hands cradled Kael's face. His thumbs traced the line of his jaw. He tasted like the coffee they'd shared earlier, and underneath it, his own scent, sandalwood, cedar warmth, wrapped around Kael like a promise. When they pulled apart, Kael was shaking, not with fear, with the overwhelming sensation of something clicking into place, like a key turning, like a door opening, like coming home to a place he'd never been. "Oh," he said stupidly. "Oh no." Dominic laughed. That full, brilliant, crinkle-eyed laugh. That's the reaction every man hopes for after a first kiss. "I mean, it's just, I had a plan. I had a mission. I had objectives and timelines, and I was going to be professional and detached, and instead I am standing in a museum at midnight having just been kissed by a crime boss, and I cannot feel my legs." "In my defense, you were warned." "By whom?" "By Marco. He told you I liked you. He said it like a threat. That's how Marco says everything. He told me happy birthday last year, and 3 people in the room thought he was issuing a challenge." Kael laughed. It was a watery, slightly hysterical laugh, but it was real, and Dominic caught it like it was a gift. Couldn't last forever. They both knew that. Commander Harris called on a Wednesday. "We've analyzed the intelligence you've provided, Reyes. It's good, but it's not enough. We're accelerating the timeline. New orders. We're moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 was the part of the operation Kael had been trying not to think about. The part where he stopped gathering intelligence and started actively building the case that would bring the Castellano family down. Arrests, prosecutions. Dominic in handcuffs, not the metaphorical kind, being led out of the club he'd built. "How long do I have?" Kael asked. 72 hours. A specialized team will be in position by Friday. All you need to do is open the back door. Literally and figuratively. The line went dead. Kael stood in the gas station bathroom, his stupid, fluorescent-lit confessional, and felt the two halves of his life collide with the force of continental plates. He drove to Dominic's apartment. It was 11 p.m. Dominic opened the door in sweatpants and a faded Columbia t-shirt, glasses on, reading a book, Caravaggio draped over his shoulder like a furry, ugly parrot. He took one look at Kael's face and stepped aside. Kael told him everything. He told him about Phase 2, about the 72 hours, about the team that would be in position on Friday, ready to execute a takedown that would dismantle everything Dominic had built. He told him without strategy, without calculation, without any of the training that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic breach of protocol. He told him because he was in love with him, and that was bigger than any mission. When he finished, the apartment was silent except for Caravaggio's purring and the distant sounds of the city. Dominic hadn't moved from his position in the armchair across from Kael. His face was unreadable. "You just burned your career," Dominic said quietly. "I know. You could face charges. Court-martial. They could. I know." Kael's voice cracked. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I know what I just did. I know what it costs. But I couldn't. Dominic, I couldn't let them." The armchair creaked. Footsteps. Then Dominic was kneeling in front of him, pulling his hands away from his face, holding them in his own. "Listen to me," Dominic said, and his voice was steady as bedrock. "I have spent 7 years preparing for this possibility. I have lawyers. I have contingency plans. I have an entire restructuring strategy that I have been slowly implementing because, Kael, look at me, because I have been trying to take my family's organization legitimate for 3 years. Kael blinked. "What?" "The charity galas. The investments in community programs. The gradual shift away from anything that could land my people in trouble. I've been building a bridge, Kael, from what we were to what we could be. It's slow, and it's messy, and there are people in my organization who resist it every day, but it's real. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to see me clearly. Not through the lens of a briefing file, not through the lens of whatever I told you to make myself look better. I wanted you to look at who I am, right now, and make your own judgment." "My judgment," Kael said, "is that you are the most infuriating, reckless, wonderful person I have ever met, and I am completely in love with you, and my career is over, and I don't care." "Your career is not over," Dominic said firmly, "because here's what we're going to do." On Friday morning, Commander Harris received a phone call. It was not from Kael. It was from Dominic Castellano's team of extremely expensive lawyers, who presented in neat, organized files a comprehensive portfolio of every legitimate business transaction the Castellano family had conducted over the past 3 years, along with a formal proposal for cooperation with federal authorities in addressing the remaining areas of concern. It was, in legal terms, a full-scale voluntary restructuring. It was, in human terms, Dominic burning down his father's legacy and building something new in its place. The task force, faced with the unprecedented situation of a target who was essentially turning himself in while simultaneously proving that he'd been dismantling his own criminal enterprise from the inside, did what any bureaucratic organization would do. They held 17 meetings, argued for 48 hours, and ultimately agreed to a deal that involved 0 arrests, significant oversight, and a structured transition to full legitimacy. Kael was not court-martialed. He was, however, subjected to a 4-hour debrief during which Commander Harris called him the most emotionally compromised operative in the history of military intelligence, and Kael sat quietly and did not argue because it was entirely accurate. He was reassigned. Honorable discharge. Full benefits. A letter in his file that said, essentially, "This man fell in love with his target and somehow it worked out. Please never speak of this again." Epilogue. 1 year later. The bar was called Caravaggio's. Not after the painter, although there were beautiful reproductions of Baroque paintings on the walls. After the cat, who had taken up residence on a cushion near the front window and who served as the establishment's unofficial mascot and emotional support animal. Kael was behind the bar, and he had, through 12 months of patient instruction from Enzo, who had been hired as head bartender and still occasionally looked at Kael like he was a natural disaster, learned to make a creditable cocktail. Not good. Creditable. "One old-fashioned," said the customer. Kael made it. It was fine. It had the correct ingredients. Nothing was on fire. The customer tasted it. "This is actually decent." "Don't sound so surprised," Kael muttered. But he was smiling. The front door opened, and Dominic walked in. He was wearing jeans and a soft sweater. No 3-piece suit, no cufflinks, no armor of elegance and authority. Just a man coming home from his evening class at Columbia, where he had re-enrolled in the art history program and was finally finishing his thesis. Dr. Whitfield had cried when he'd contacted her. He'd cried too, though he'd deny it if asked. "Hey," Dominic said, sliding onto his usual stool. Caravaggio the cat opened his single eye, confirmed it was his favorite human, and went back to sleep. "Hey yourself." Kael leaned across the bar. "How was class?" "Wonderful. We're studying Artemisia Gentileschi. Absolutely brilliant painter. Criminally underappreciated. I gave a 15-minute impromptu lecture and my professor had to physically stop me." "Shocking behavior from you." Dominic grinned. "Make me a drink? What do you want?" "Surprise me." Kael considered this. Then, with great ceremony, he took out a glass, poured a measure of bourbon, added a splash of something that was definitely not Worcestershire sauce, dropped in an orange peel and a cherry, whole, not crushed, and set it in front of Dominic. "An old-fashioned," Kael said. "A real one." Dominic picked it up, sipped. His eyebrows rose. "This is actually, Kael, this is genuinely good. Don't be so dramatic. I'm being sincere. This is, after everything I've endured from you, every liquefied flamingo, every Worcestershire atrocity. This is good." "Well," Kael felt his cheeks warm. "I had motivation to learn." "Oh? What motivation?" "I wanted to make something perfect for you. Just once." Dominic set the glass down. He reached across the bar, hooked his fingers into the front of Kael's apron, and pulled him in for a kiss. It was soft and sweet and tasted like bourbon and oranges and the specific kind of happiness that comes from finding someone who sees every single chaotic, imperfect, disastrous thing about you and chooses you anyway. Caravaggio the cat opened his eye, yawned, and went back to sleep. Marco, who was sitting at a corner table doing a crossword puzzle because his job now consisted primarily of security consulting and occasionally intimidating health inspectors, looked up, sighed with the long-suffering patience of a man who had been watching this romance unfold for over a year, and went back to 7 across. Enzo, who was polishing glasses behind the bar, shook his head and muttered, "Get a room." Kael pulled back from the kiss, laughing, his forehead resting against Dominic's. "You know," he said, "when they sent me to end you, this wasn't exactly the outcome anyone had in mind." "No," Dominic agreed, his thumb tracing the line of Kael's jaw, his smile soft and certain and full of every tomorrow he intended to spend exactly like this. "It's much better." Outside, the city hummed. Inside, an ugly cat purred on a window cushion. Behind the bar, an Omega who had once been the worst undercover agent in history stood shoulder to shoulder with an Alpha who had once been a crime boss and was now a graduate student, and they built something together that no intelligence briefing could have predicted and no mission could have planned. Something messy, something imperfect, something real, something that tasted, finally, after much practice, like a really good old-fashioned. The end.